Welcome back to yet another episode of your Reeducated podcast. Today, we have an extremely special guest, Antoinette Vermilye. She is a leading advocate for marine conservation whose work emphasizes the interconnectedness of environmental issues and the need for a holistic approach to solving the planet's most pressing challenges. With a strong focus on the ocean's role in biodiversity, she is dedicated to addressing the sixth mass extinction, promoting environmental stewardship, and fostering curiosity and humility in tackling complex global problems. I did it! How are you?
I am very well, thank you very much. A little bit jet lagged, but we've actually just come back from Hawaii, where I spent some time, because where I live, which is in Switzerland, we don't have an ocean. And so my ocean work, where I actually get to meet the creatures that I love and get to commune and see how they're doing, is over there.
And so you just flew back a couple days ago, or when did you come back?
2 days ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how often do you do that trip?
Well, when we go, we try to spend about 6 weeks or 2 months there, because I hate my carbon footprint on that. But in this case, because we'd had a difficult summer for other reasons, we only had to do it hopping from one place to another. So we did parts of the US and then went over just for 2 weeks, but 2 weeks that were gorgeous, and actually doing a lot of work over there. So, yeah.
What type of work were you up to?
First of all, we did with a local group, an experiment on a plastic cleanup on a beach. But this time, which was extremely frustrating, we were only taking plastics that were bigger than 5 millimeters. And beaches are covered it's like confetti. And we were kind of like, because the experiment was saying we need to see what's bigger, we were having to leave behind a lot of microplastics, which was painful, but also so enlightening, because we could see what are the big things that we usually ignore. We sort of say, oh yeah, that's that. But now we're actually counting the things before they've broken down. We're trying to protect a local coral. We were doing shark diving to see the state of sharks in Hawaii. Blue Planet Alliance, we were working with people from Asia Pacific and small island states, to sign a memorandum of understanding between Gallifrey and the Blue Planet Alliance, which is all about promoting renewable energy sources, sustainable renewable energy. And we're trying to get countries, particularly island states, to become more reliant on that, because they have the needs. They don't need to use oil and gas necessarily, or fossil fuels. So it's trying to encourage that switch. And it's a working group getting them all together, talking about deep sea bed mining. So, yeah, it was a quiet time.
Wow. I mean, there are so many questions that I want to ask you. One, about the work that you have done, but I also want to eventually get to your background and get to know more about you. But I want to first talk about some of the work that you did. So in these 2 weeks, when you go to these places, I mean, what's your thought process like? Are you trying to learn? Are you trying to solve the problems? How do you balance between trying to learn and actually employing whatever you already have learned to fix these problems?
So I think it's interesting you should say that. I connect. I kind of like am a little networker. So I'll plug into communities with whom I already know, but they're also evolving. So imagine that if I were to do it, you're driving an electric vehicle down a highway and you switch lanes, okay? In one lane, you're going to have things happening, and in another lane. So what I'm doing is trying to look at all that movement and seeing, okay, this is going along very well. You don't really need me. But sometimes someone from the outside, a new player, a new voice, can bring a catalyst change. And that can sometimes help and sometimes it doesn't. In Hawaii, also, what's very important is the story of narrative. So when I'm in Europe, we're all talking very dryly about policy. But when you're in Hawaii or in Asia Pacific, it's very, we tell stories. Things are done in a much more gentle, much more inferred way. And in fact, it's actually incredible because you come out feeling really good that we're all working collectively towards different problems. So sometimes it may be someone holding a meeting, sometimes I'll call people together, or we'll convene, or it's one on one. It depends. So my work is eclectic and not necessarily at a school with a very strict routine. It's like these are the 5 areas that we'd like to move forward on. Who's doing what in that area? Do we need to meet them? And anyway, meeting with people in Hawaii is always such a learning and humbling experience. So I come out come out pretty well. The next country is Japan. I come out a changed person there as well because I find it such a polite, respectful.
Hmm. And so you talk a little bit about one, are you working with Indigenous people in Hawaii or? Okay.
So we work with Indigenous or Native Hawaiians or people who have lived in Hawaii for many years, but we're always trying, the aim there is to bring the Hawaiian voice, the Hawaiian culture to the forefront and then be following, because actually that's what's starting to happen. And I find that so important because it completely changes everything. It changes the deep understanding of our ecosystems. In Hawaii, we talk about Mauka to Makai, from the ridge, mountain ridge to the ocean, how everything is connected. And that is deeply understood there because on an island, you see those impacts very quickly. If you live in France, something happening in a mountain is not necessarily going to show all the way down to the sea. You're not going to see it as quickly. And so that's what I love about this, is that we're learning to respect the holistic, the entire ecosystem. We can't play whack-a-mole and protect one thing without ensuring that the habitat and the conditions around it are also protected. And we tend to be very siloed and very dogmatic in our approaches. And the more I deal with Indigenous peoples and who have been custodians of this for centuries, it's a matter of gentle observation sometimes. And then the science actually plays out that that was exactly the thing to do.
Mhm. Before I have so many questions to ask you about conservation, but before we dive fully into that, I wanted to maybe get to first know who you are a little better. So, where did you grow up, and what was your early education experiences like that eventually led you to find your deep passion for conservation and this work that you do?
So I grew up in West Africa, in Nigeria. I was the youngest of 3 kids, 3 sisters, but my 2 sisters were much older than me. So essentially, I grew up as an only child. And my mother was like, she refused to allow me to be bored. That was not allowed. You're not allowed to say you're bored. So I would spend a lot of my time out in the garden. And I learnt then very early the power of observation, of just watching, not interfering with nature, not trying to interact with it, but just staying very still. And it was amazing because the first 5 minutes are a bit boring. But then when nature gets used to you, all sorts of things would happen. I'd probably see a chameleon or even a snake. I'd see funny ants. I'd see weird and wonderful creatures. And of course, in the ocean, you saw everything. And I was also swimming in creeks with crocodiles. So not such a good idea. But the point was, I suddenly started to learn how to make myself very small so that way I would be the least amount of impact on what was going on around me. And I think that was something that then I started to learn. In Nigeria, on a Sunday, there'd be the Nigerian fishermen who would go out on these canoes, long canoes, out to go fishing. And when they came back, they'd come back with, their haul. And it really upset me because I could see then how these fish were really suffering. I mean, they were gasping for air. They were hurt. They were in pain. Okay, we all have to eat. I'm not going, but that was the point when I went, we must be able to do this in a better way, in a more compassionate way. And that was the beginning of my love of nature, and realizing very quickly that humans tend to use other lives as a means to an end without necessarily giving regard for the sacrifice of that life to feed us, and the respect and the honor that should go with that if you're going to go down that road.
It's so interesting because the last conversation I had just spoken to, I spoke to someone who talked about the history of architecture and how it's changed, and how we live in a world now where it's all about efficiency. How quickly can we get these homes out? There's no real personal touch with anything that we do. And to now hear you reflect a different kind of, but on the same line perspective of that, we kind of live in this way where lives are simply a means to an end, where if it's an animal life, are you going to be tasty? Are you going to provide me whatever entertainment? And to the point where we even view other humans like that too now is fascinating. Do you feel that this is something that is intrinsic to being human, or something that is like culturally evolved over time?
Well, we're all human. We all have the possibility of those characteristics, but we also all have the possibility to reject those characteristics. The one thing I always tell everyone is we have agency. It's the one thing that people can't take away from us easily, is how you express yourself, how you comport yourself. So I do realize that in the bigger picture, we've been marketed into this convenient life, which in fact always reminds me a little bit of that Pixar movie WALL-E. I don't know if you've seen it about,
100%,
but
yes.
but remember, the humans are so lazy because they don't get up. They just sip food from a sippy cup. And it's kind of like, is that really what that's the reflection of what we want to be? When, if you look at back to indigenous cultures, or even, non-Western cultures, working a land, working and connecting, yield something that is so much greater. The sum is greater than its parts. I don't know if ever you've grown a tomato, but the feeling of actually planting a seed and watching this plant grow and getting a tomato out of it is like I made fire. I'm powerful. And because we're creating a relationship with that plant. Whereas you go to a supermarket, you've got the tomato, you don't even know where it came from or anything, and you just accept it as is. Whereas your tomato is so precious because you've watched it every day. It's a very different relationship. And in our pressure in society to move on, next, we're not actually slowing down and saying, what about this journey? Because it's the journey that's the teaching, not the destination.
Mm. It's interesting because I think a lot of people have recently brought up this concept on the show, talking about what is rich, what does it mean to be rich. And we had an amazing breathwork instructor come and talk about how richness can be the depth of your feelings when you are interacting, or through your relationship with something, rather than the thing itself. It's not that you have this huge garden or huge plant, or it's your relationship with whatever it is that you do have. And as you said, when it's something that you have built and put time and energy into, it changes to be something that's completely different. So what do you think is our drive then to always be more comfortable? Where did that come from, and why is it so prolific?
Well, that's a profound question. I put it down to basically the rise of Western convenience culture. The supermarket has completely disconnected us from the reality of our food systems, and therefore we're allowing a lot more inhumane methods to cut the corners to deliver more meat. If you look at even the shape of a cow nowadays to what it looked like 100 years ago, many of them are just big squares of meat. And they have characters almost like dogs. They're intelligent. Pigs are intelligent like dogs. Chickens can barely stand. They've been bred and formed so that they produce massive amounts of meat, but they literally physically they're unable to bear that weight. If we even look at our pets, and I get more and more worried about this, I'm seeing this explosion of everyone wanting to own a pet. But these pets have been bred to be tiny, so their bones crack very easily. Or you have you have pugs and bulldogs. Yeah. They can barely breathe. You have pit bulls and other dogs that have been bred to be vicious, when in fact they weren't. They were just terriers. So we're sort of like trying to mold everything for our convenience. And I think that there's a level, that's a price that we're paying. We're playing with the devil there, because it's going to come back and bite us. So I think in the end, what is doing this? It's because many of us are under so much pressure financially to survive that the things that you want to think about, like this, the art, the creativity, the thinking, the philosophy of why we are where we are, is a luxury nowadays. It's not allowed. It's basically you're a kid, go to school, go out, get a job, get your car, get your house, have your kids, and then you're into the system. So everything that you think you're doing is actually just feeding into the system. I mean, the matrix, the red pill and the blue pill, it's pretty much where we're at. Do you want the red or the blue? And the point is, when you step back and you say, okay, I'm not going to be I'm going to have to be part of this system, but how can I step out of it? How can I understand my role in it? And where can I move away from that, or at least understanding that system, where are the ways that I can start making a change, or encouraging that change, or creating awareness?
So something that I've been thinking about, and we had that conversation with the architect similar to this, which is one of the difficulties it seems like that we have to contend with, is that for a lot of the things, we were talking about the construction of schools. When we have to do it at the scale that we're required to do it in today's day, we sometimes can't put the amount of time that it would take to like properly, love and shape every wall and every window. And that amount of effort might be challenging to do when we have to do it at the scale. And I think this is definitely true with food as well. What are your thoughts on how we kind of balance these two, where we have to contend with the fact that we have to do these in these really large scales, but at the same time, we want it to be human still?
Yeah, I think from my research, it's like, so with fish, okay, fishing, we extract half the weight of the human population in fishes annually, and we discard half of them before it even lands. Don't tell me that that's sufficient or effective or compassionate. It's an absolute extravagance to sit there and say, I'm going to fish, everything. I'm going to destroy the bottom of the sea, but just to get my target fish. And anything else that doesn't fit there goes back in the sea and dies. That's wrong. That's actually insulting to life, whereas we should be cherishing it all. So the same for farming. If you look at the amount of calories that we need to eat, we actually either overeat. So even in America, people who are obese are actually nutritionally poor, because there's so many chemicals and everything that's added. So when we talk about food poverty, it doesn't have to be the quantity, it's the quality. And we're going back down this road again, where I'll just tell you a story. I have a friend of mine who's from Nigeria, and one time, and I grew up in Nigeria. So one time we did a vegan meal, and I was discussing, I did the vegan meal because it's planet friendly. And I want to show you that even if you don't eat plant based all the time, you can still have a good meal. So I said, what do you think of it? And he said, well, Antoinette, the salad, I'd give that to a rabbit. No, not my thing. So I said, okay, fine. And he said, but the mushroom risotto, yeah, that was good. And he said, of course, the dessert was great. So I said, okay, fine. He said, but Antoinette, I want to let you know that if I gave this meal to my mother in Nigeria, she would be so shocked and so insulted. She'd go back to her village and say, look at my son that I bore in my stomach for 9 months, and look what he gives me. So I was quiet for a bit. And I said, but we both grew up in Nigeria. How often did you have meat when you were little? And he went, and I said, me too. I'd have meat probably once a week. It was a Sunday roast or something like that. The marketing has made this a socio-economic status symbol to eat meat. And that's been growing, because in Nigeria before, it was mainly fish or yams or taro or pork. It was a different diet, but it's considered now, oh, I've made it. I'm socially, it's a class thing. The more that I eat like Western style, the better, the better it is, which is, it's a marketing thing. So you have to step back and realize how is that relevant now, to where we stand on the planet today, when literally 96% of all biomass on the planet comprises humans and livestock. Only 4% of all living things are wild creatures. I mean, wow. What an impression that is when you think, okay, it's too much. So how are we going to make it fun? How can you make that fun? And I think that's the point, is whatever we do, we have to do this with joy. And I actually like trying new recipes. When I go shopping, I make a game of buying food that's not in plastic and hopefully organic. And so when I go around the supermarket, my kids say, what are we having for dinner? And I'm going to tell you, let's see. And then let's go find a recipe that fits around that. And that's how I do it. So those are the kind of things, they're different ways and it's your attitude. It's how we can change this. And that's where I use my agency. A mother who's single with 2 kids may not have that luxury. And you have to be compassionate for that. But where possible, we have to be able to give her the choice of not always taking the lowest common denominator in bad food, bad chemicals, bad packaging, and non-sustainable.
There's this quote that's coming to mind when you're going through some of what you were saying, which is, I think it was Gandhi. I forgot who said it, but it was something of, we have enough for like every man's needs, but we don't have enough for every man's greed. And yes. I think that there's a lot to say for what you're saying. I mean, I think about this all the time, of this whole, like, you're not big enough, you're not strong enough, and so eat more. And like, I go to some countries where the portions are just so much smaller. And it was funny. I'm in Japan right now. I went to there's a pizza place relatively close to the place that I'm staying in, and I had asked him, what the size of the pizza was, and he was like, it's like, he put his hand out, it's about the size of like 2 palms together, and he was like, it's small, and he started laughing because he knew I was American, because we talked a lot, and I was like, and I put my hand, I was like, it's not American size, and made it a giant circle, and I was just like, I'm so used to everything that I eat being in such massive portions. But the insane part is, so much of that is tied to understandings of what it means to be a man, what it means, you have to be this big, you have to be this strong, and so you kind of fall into this ideal, so much so that taking care of your diet in a healthy way, or those fall so much lower on the list. And so maybe that's an interesting question to ask. Each one of these are different value systems. So for example, I want to eat in a healthy way, or defining healthy, or I want to live in a sustainable way. That's one value. And I'm assuming everyone probably has that somewhere in their value system. But it often falls way lower on the list rather than I want my family to think highly of me. I want, whatever else comes above it. What do you think kind of shapes that from culture to culture? What are the differences in some of the cultures you've seen where it places sustainability and these type of like paying attention to the impacts that I have? What are the difference between cultures that place that value high versus others that place that lower?
Those that are connected to the planet. I'm sorry,
Mm,
every time I go to Africa, people who are there, of course, they're getting caught into the supermarket, the mall mentality, but they're out there. They're seeing life and nature around them. Even in Japan, where you are, there is so much work that is done that is constantly watching nature. If I go to island nations, oh my gosh, they know, they can see exactly those connections. So I think at the end, when you talk about those values, where it is, and this is the thing I always say, is that red pill and blue pill. If you're going to just go through the system without questioning it, without being philosophical about what is it I'm doing it, where am I going, why am I doing this, it's easy just to say, oh, I've got a bill of pay, I've got to go get some food, I've got to feed the family, I've got to fill the car up with gas, so that's a life that you're just doing the tasks. But when you step out of it and go, do I have to fill the car up with gas? Why don't I take a bike ride? Or do I really need to eat meat? Let me try something different. Is the way that we're doing things, the way we're living our life, is it me who is choosing that, or am I being herded into it? And the key element that woke my life up to that one day was I was doing a time management course many years ago. And someone said to me, if you were talking to a person and someone stepped between you and that person and started talking to you, would you think that that was rude? And I said, well, yeah. And they said, well, then why do you answer the phone when someone's talking to you? And it was like, yay, I don't have to answer that phone. And it was an epiphany of the control that I have, but I was automatically reacting. And sometimes there's something quite liberating about that. So now, if I'm doing something and the phone's ringing, if it's that important, they'll phone back or there's a message. That's how I do it. If it's my family, I know because I've got my codes, it's urgent. But the point I'm just trying to say is sometimes we just go through things, through life, because we're just going through it. But the joy is going, why am I feeling this way? What are the circumstances? What could change? And in fact, it's quite liberating because you realize that your options are not as limited as we think they are. And you may say, oh, I've tried this and I don't like it. I'm now at the age where I'm going back and saying, all the things I said I didn't like, that I would not do, I'm doing them now just to check.
mm. It's like if it's something you have to do or not.
Yeah, you say, oh, I could never bungee jump. Well,
Yeah.
okay, try it.
Yeah. And see. I did. I feel like I went through a lot of that during the pandemic. I remember the big one was I was like, I always had told myself, I was like, if I ever shave my eyebrows off, I know I've made it. And I did it over COVID. I did it over the pandemic, and I was like, I did it. I felt so. That's like definitely one of my most proud moments. I looked crazy though. I did not look well for a few weeks, but I
But
used to
you
wear
did
these
it.
glasses. I did do it,
Yeah.
and I used to wear these glasses that would cover. It was a circular, and it would cover up right where the eyebrows went. So it looked fine when I had the glasses on. But there's something that you're saying here, which is speaking very loudly to me because you said that the differences you've noticed between cultures are the ones that are more connected to the world. For me, another big part, and I'm curious to what extent this plays, is to being connected to others. And not simply just the others around you, but the others who have come before you and the others who come after you. Because when you used a very particular word, you used a custodian. I thought that was such a unique word that you had used, the custodians of the land. When you're a custodian of the land, you're very aware of the fact that there will be people after you who will be living on this land far after you die, which means you have to confront the fact that your time here is limited and that you're going to die. I feel like in a lot of societies, that particular conception is not even talked about. I mean, we really don't ever say these things like, you are going to die, and that's part of the process, and that there will be people who come after you. I mean, I think when I look back to my education, I don't think we ever talked about death until I was like 17, maybe one time. And it is one of the most impactful kind of things that happen in our lives. And just the fact that it ends is mind blowing. But it seems that to be able to want to, because my whole thing is, I can understand why people just wouldn't care about the people who come after them, because oftentimes they don't even, it's hard to even conceptualize that people will come after you. It sometimes feels like the universe ends when you die, because you live in this world where you are the center, and because of your perception it makes sense you feel that way, and then it's hard to imagine that things continue after you, which only if you have that, if you've embodied that understanding, will you care to take care of things. I mean, right?
So it's interesting you should say that. I think when we're young, it's like, I'm living forever. It's going to be great. Yeah, forget that. I'm going to smoke. I'm going to drink, sort of thing. And then you get to the age where you're like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. But I think I talk now about that we're mortgaging our children's future, because the way things have happened in the last 50 years, and that's why I am so passionate about what I do, that most of what has gone wrong on the planet has happened in the last 50 years. It's this exponential curve that is going on. I think at the end, I am a great believer, and that was my role as a kid, of watching. If you look at human interaction from back in even archaeological times through civilizations, much of it has been done by observing things. And by observing, that's where the learning has come. In this day and age now, and I think, again, quoting Einstein, is that humanity has not managed to keep up with technology. So we're technologically advanced, but as we can see in the state of our collective character on the planet today, there is not enough humanity that's going on. It's very much an attrition. So you have a value, but you don't. This creature has a value, but that one doesn't. And I think that that's where we have to step back and go back to that stewardship, that husbandry, that custodianship, and realize that we have a responsibility as part of an ecosystem, the most, I don't want to say powerful, but the ones with the biggest ability to create change, can be for good and can be for bad. And the question I have to deal with is almost like a balloon, a lung that inhales and exhales, because it can be in small gestures within our own sphere, or it can be a big, it can be a systemic change. And all of them are leading to those changes. And I'm living in the world of yin and yang, where there's some dark forces and there's some really good forces. But we've got to try and work to make even the dark forces work for good.
Okay, I have two pathways of questionings we can go down. I'm going to give
Well,
you the choice. We can either, because I'm thinking, we can either talk about what Plastic Free Campus does in your efforts, and then talk about what your utopic world looks like, or we can do it vice versa. Start with the utopic vision of what a world that is sustainable looks like in the future, and then talk about what Plastic Free Campus does. What would you like to do?
difficult. Let's do Plastic Free Campus first,
Okay, let's
because
start
that
there.
could lead to it.
Okay, so
Okay.
let's start. Okay, so this is your attempts on making some of the changes that you would like to see in the world. So what does Plastic Free Campus does, and what was the? We can maybe start with the inception.
Okay, so the inception was, we had a brilliant young woman working for us. We actually embedded her in the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, in order to help them advance their work on plastics. And that was basically at the time when we were starting to realize how prevalent and insidious the impacts of plastics are. So just out of interest, I'm going to ask you, if I talk to you about plastics, what do you think is the biggest damage that's done? What would you say?
I actually don't know much about this, but I would say fish and birds eat them and die.
Correct. Okay. So in the environment, plastics go into the ocean, for example. Virtually all sea turtles have been found with plastics. Whales have been found with tons of plastic, and so they've slowly starved to death. Birds feed the lids to their babies, and therefore they fill up the stomach with plastic which they can't expel. So the birds basically starve from inside out. So that's quite a well-known problem. People talk about the straw, they talk about a single-use plastics, okay, because that is contributing a huge amount to it. But there's another side to plastics that we don't know about, or most people don't. And I went down this road is, first of all, fishes ingest plastics as part of their food. And then what will happen is as they get eaten by bigger and bigger fish, those fish end up with more and more plastics in them till you get to the apex like salmon, tuna, sharks, whales, cod. The big fish, the carnivorous, are the ones that have most of them in it. When you dissect that, you realize that all these fish have been found with microplastics in them. So basically, we're eating microplastics. The other side of this that most people don't know is that to make plastic comes from fossil fuel. So it's oil, gas, and coal. To make the plastics, we have to add chemicals that make them soft or hard or squishy. And those are petrochemicals that are added. And they have chemicals that imitate our hormone system. So during the last 50 years, one example, male sperm count and motility has declined 50% in the last 40 years globally, and on track to hit statistical zero in 20 years. It's yeah, exactly. In addition, that's easy enough to track, but women are having problems with miscarriages, IVF, all of these issues. The chemicals are linked to brain cancers, thyroid, breast cancer, testicular cancer. So there's so many things that and this is all because, and people say, but the government regulates that. The reality is that governments don't regulate those chemicals. In the world of over 16,000 chemicals, only 1% is globally regulated by governments. And the reason is because there's so many differing ones. It's a complicated world. We've gone faster. Every day they're adding new chemicals and so forth. But I think the thing is that's part of why we developed Plastic Free Campus, is because we were trying to alert young people to the fact that this is not just an environmental issue. This is a human and planetary health issue. And there's a social justice issue, because where do you think half your recycled plastic goes?
Let me guess. Let me think about it give me like 10 seconds. Let me think. Where does half my plastic recycle material goes? Is it in the ocean?
A lot more goes into the ocean, but that's just plastic waste. Yeah. About 90% of our plastic goes into the ocean.
Wow, 90%. Dang. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about out of the last 10%, which is
so the last 10%, the plastic that's picked up from your door.
Probably goes into like landfills? No.
So some of it goes to landfill, some of it goes to incineration, but the other is recycled. And I'm doing my little ant hands because it gets sent to another country usually in the global south, and they're told, "Wait, we'll give you a bit of money and you deal with it," but they don't have the facilities. So we're exacerbating social injustice, we're exacerbating human health impacts, and we're exacerbating the environment. And all of these combined, again, it's not just one thing, it's the three together that are starting to really add up and create some insidious reactions. So our role with Plastic Free Campus was to show kids how much plastic are you using? And it's basically an audit. You just do for a week. You count whatever it is. You can say, I'm going to count just bottles. I'm going to count single-use plastics. So I'm going to count everything up to the school. And then after that is, what are the steps that you can go to start swapping them out with reusables? Where does your recycling really go to? How do you negotiate with your procurer, your procurement team? Because, of course, the biggest resistance you'll always get is, the cost. We're going to have to buy something that we're going to have to wash as opposed to throw away. So that is basically what we did with Plastic Free Campus. And during COVID, we put it online because our aim was to try and get this available to global South countries. So we translated it into French, Spanish, Bahasa Indonesian, English, American. So we did a number of languages so that it could be useful. And we also do online webinars and help the schools go through this. But the point about it was to give, again, what I keep going back to: critical thinking, negotiation skills, and showing kids that they have agency to make change, but that it's not easy. It's not easy.
So a few questions. So one, what % of this plastic use is like done at the consumer level versus, I don't know, is it done at maybe a lot larger corporation kind of? Who takes on more of the responsibility, I guess, is what I'm asking. Like, is it the person to not use it, or is it on the corporation to not put it in their products?
So it's basically privatize the profits, externalize the costs. So Coca-Cola is the leading consumer beverage that is found on beach cleanups around the world, and it's consistently the winner. What happens is Coca-Cola in Africa used to have a deposit system. Every village in Africa knew it. You'd go in, you get your glass bottle, you drink it, come back, put the empty bottle in a crate, get your deposit return, and buy another bottle. Okay. Then they switched to plastic bottles. Okay. Within a year, there was a mountain of plastic bottles. Who paid for that? Do you think Coca-Cola paid for it? No. They got the profits, but who is paying? It's taxpayers. It's waste pickers who get the most undignified job, having to pick through them for essentially supposed recycling. But that plastic blows away, it breaks down, it gets eaten up by creatures. It's there. I mean, plastic does not break down, we now know, for over 400 years. So you have something that just does not go away. So for the moment of a quick drink, which is probably 10 minutes maximum, that's your lasting legacy. So the thing about that is, what's wrong with this picture? Does that make sense? Does that make sense as a custodian, as someone who cares for the planet, cares for their children, cares for themselves? Because that is where the problem is that all of these plastic bottles and packaging are not only the profits go to the companies, but they don't pay anything in the costs of waste management, in the health costs or whatever. So that's the issue. So how do we change that? And the only way to do that is to wake people up to the fact that you're being gamed. You're actually paying 3 times. You pay Coca-Cola for your drink. You pay Coca-Cola via your taxes to clean up the waste. And if you get sick, you're paying Coca-Cola again, or because they didn't pay for your sickness. That doesn't make sense. That is not how business with a real purpose should be done. It should be done to care for your clients. And they know that. So that's half of our battle.
This is a really, really dumb science question, but I am working on my science knowledge, and it will be there in a few years. But is it possible to create edible plastic, or is that insane?
Okay. Are we talking about plastic? So plastic as a word is an interesting one. Yes, there is an edible plastic. It's seaweed. Seaweed is edible and it is non-toxic. So that is the good news. Plastics that are made from hydrocarbons, from oil, gas, or coal, actually are always going to be harmful because they have harmful chemicals in them that hurt us. So there is a development we've discovered worms, enzymes, and bacteria that will eat plastic. But it's taking time. In fact, the first ones were discovered in Japan in a landfill. So what they're trying to do is, because given the amount of plastic that we're producing, okay, don't we want to you don't want to end up with Franken monsters that become plastic eating monsters and then overrun Godzilla worms or whatever. So what they're trying to do is refine that and see how they can create these enzymes that can break down plastics to something that is non-toxic, and that there are no microplastics left, or micro or nanoplastics left. So that's that part. On the other hand, though, and this is the point that's exciting, we're at the beginning of a new world. There are so many possibilities for substitutions, but the safest ones are the ones that are the most chemically inert, which would be glass, metal, wood. Those are the things you can use every day. And where you are in Japan, except for their new plastic love, but traditionally Japan used very little plastic. Everything was reusable. It was beautifully crafted, made it with wood. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the place that I've been most fascinated by plastic is on planes. Like every single tiny thing that they give is, I mean, it's actually, yeah, when I was flying on the plane was when I was like, I think everything is packaged like I mean, every small little thing has its own packaging. So I guess my question is, from the individual perspective, and then I guess we could talk maybe about policy as well, but from the individual perspective, what are some of the main areas where we end up using far more plastic than we would need to?
Um, just wake up every day and start looking at your plastic exposure, because we do. I have not used a plastic bottle for 10 years now. And it's a game. I take it as a game. It's like my challenge. I'm going to keep going. But there are times I'm bloody thirsty. But I'll find a way. If I have to find a tap and cut my hands, I'll do it. But the point I'm trying to say is, no one can do everything all in one go. So just start with something. Start by saying, I'm going to get a reusable bottle, and I'm going to make sure that I drink from a reusable bottle. Or you can even take an old glass one that you've bought and use that for the while. So these are things that are not expensive. But once you start with one thing, then you go, okay, maybe I'll not give up a plastic bag. Or maybe when I go shopping, I'm going to look for food that's not wrapped in plastic. And actually, that's a wake-up call, because everything's wrapped in
Yeah,
plastic.
everything. Yeah, that's a hard one. Yeah. Even if you
But
get
then
even if you get vegetables, you put it in plastic, right?
organic vegetables, where you pay a premium, are wrapped in plastic. So there's chemical migration. Talk to me how stupid that is. So the point is, how do we get savvy? How do we get better? And it's a constant battle, because we're learning more and more. So the point is also, and back to compassion, you're not going to get it right all the time, but just keep trying.
So is plastic a problem if we just consume a lot less?
I think so. We've got to be realistic. We are overproducing plastic. If we applied every type of recycling and waste management proposal today, we would not even address 70% of the plastics that are produced. So we're basically mopping up a bathroom floor whilst the tap is fire hosing plastics. And if you look around, you should just do this for fun next time. And in Japan, you'll see what's unnecessary and stupid plastic. Just go look at things. Do you need to wrap a fork up in plastic? Do you need to wrap an apple up? Do you need to wrap a banana up in plastic? Do you need to wrap? I mean, ask yourself how many of the things are wrapped in plastic that really don't need to be. That's already your starting point. Then the next thing is, okay, so what would my substitute be? How could I get around this? And that's the fun part. So some of my work is looking at new ideas, new systems, reuse, refill, and investigating what's out there that is developing. So this seaweed, and Japan has been doing this for 2,000 years. They're the masters of aquaculture for seaweed. And they've been making agar agar. They can use it for a small, okay, it's a limited use at the moment because plastics, bioplastics from seaweed, the only binder in it is salt. So that's it. So you've got a toxic-free plastic that you could use, and that would, once you put it in water, it will just dissolve. That's brilliant. But then there are other things where I hear, oh, this is biodegradable and biocompostable. There's so much bullshit that's gone on with companies who are so desperate to keep their models going that they have rules that say, well, you can call it a plastic free, but it has that 30% virgin plastic. You can call it recycled, but it has 30% virgin plastic. That's not solving the problem. And remember that therefore, when you recycle plastics, the chemical processes are usually heating of some kind or pyrolysis, and those create new types of chemical interactions of which we have no idea what they're doing. So there's a lot here that we can do to basically just step away as much as we can from them. There's systemic change and there is plastic reduction. Those are and toxins. We've got to remove the toxics from plastics.
And so in terms of what Plastic Free Campus does, from what I'm understanding, it's a course that works with students. Is that correct?
So,
and yeah.
Yeah, it's basically what we did is we gave this, it's for free. It's online. If you live in Africa and not all your students have access to computers, you can download the modules and work through it with the students. The first stage is telling you a little bit about the background of plastics. Then the second stage is creating a green team or an eco team, the people who really want to champion this, because nothing's going to happen if people don't champion it. Then after that, it's your audit. So you get the whole school to do an audit of their plastics, and they'll see how much, how little, whatever. They decide what they want to change and what they can change. And the point about this is if you look at plastic the way that I do, I can't unsee it. I will walk into a room and I'll go plastic, plastic. I can't help it now because that's my awareness. So the aim is to just create the awareness for kids that they'll walk into a room and not see the plastic, but see the plastic and say, what do I need to do to change that, avoid it, or is it okay? So let's be realistic. Planes are plastic. I can't stop that. We are going to have some plastics that we need, but we've got to understand that we have to be working for a phase out, a transition out. We have to understand with compassion that not all the solutions are going to be slam dunk working, but some will. And the other thing is that we also have to be compassionate that these impacts, okay, will be harmful, not just to us humans. I'm talking about that because that's what concerns politicians, but also to all the creatures out there. I came across a turtle, a sea turtle in Kenya this summer, which had no genital openings. It basically died because the endocrine disrupting chemicals that are out there have affected its formation as a little turtle, and that was it. It died. But these are genetic defaults that are starting to happen. So, and we're seeing it with other things. So it is a grim thing, but the point is, you don't need to go and hammer that in. You need to just say you can do something by avoiding it. That's it. And then maybe you can talk to your headmaster, or you can talk to your community, or you can talk to your family and your dad and maybe your mum, because where they work, maybe you can do something. I mean, I did about 4 years ago a presentation at a private bank, and the CEO was there, and he said, "Tomorrow, no more plastics." And I was like, whoa, that is change. That's how it happens. So there are ways we have to just try.
So I mean, I guess now we can kind of talk about the vision of what a utopic world kind of looks like, which is, what does this world look like? So is it just plastics, or is it also other, or is it primarily plastic? And then what does a world look like where we structurally break down the ways we use it?
So it's not my world. It's a world where I don't have a job because we don't need people like me. In the big picture, the utopia would be that citizens can actually work at a local level with inclusive stakeholders, everyone who's involved. It's more painful. It's a lot more difficult. But at the end of the day, we're trying to work together as communities for the betterment and to bring in, as a player, the environment. So right now, the law is such that if I cut down your hedge, okay, you can take me to court because it's on your property. If I cut down a forest in the middle of nowhere, who cares that you've just decimated a whole species, their habitat and everything? That doesn't have a value. Companies have personhood. The environment does not. So we need to realize that that's the ecosystem. It's not an ecosystem. Humans can only survive as part of a bigger community. And the irony is, I always laugh that, we're trying to go out and see the universe when the universe is here around us. It's everything. It's underwater. When I go underwater, I see a different universe. If I go into a forest, I see a different universe. If you dig in the ground and you look through a microscope, it's another universe. Look at the mycorrhizal root system between trees talking to each other. That's the wood wide web. There's so many amazing things, and yet we're all trying to get away from it. And it's kind of like we don't value what we have. And I think that's the point, is learning to value and care and cherish, because you will only protect what you love, and you will only love when you see it.
I mean, this seems like a deep education strategy then, where it has to be an entire shift in value systems, but also how you see things and what you prioritize. And so, I have one student who's actually really, really passionate and cares deeply about a lot of these issues. But something I always notice is, in a lot of ways, he's given up hope. And I find that he finds caring about these things to be very overwhelming. What has been your journey with this, and how would you recommend, especially young students who don't really have, when you're 15, 16, you have all these thoughts and ideas, but you don't have the power, or even a lot of times the vocabulary to really express what you want. And so what are your thoughts on how you can not lose motivation and fall into a deep sense of nihilism?
Very, very good, very important point. I think all of us, the more that I learn, it's not always good news. It's actually quite depressing. But I started out, as a mother with kids, and here I am talking to you on a podcast, which is pretty surreal. um, the thing is that I've learned that community. So if you are starting out, the first thing is find your tribe. Find people who care as much as you do. Create a WhatsApp group. Create a kind of a after school meetup. Some ways to connect, because you need to know that you're not alone. On my days, I get days when I go, oh bugger, this awful thing has happened. What are we going to do? But I work very much on LinkedIn and with so many groups. So I know if I'm having a bad day, I know at least 15,000 people out there who are doing something. And I'm going, well, I'm the one who's having the bad day, but they're probably having really good days. So somewhere out there, they're all working in the same direction. And remember that there's a very famous story about a man who was visiting the space program in Kennedy Center before the first rocket was going up. And there was this guy, a janitor, who was sweeping the floor. And one guy came up to him and said, what are you doing? What's your job here? And he said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. It doesn't matter who we are in that ecosystem. We all have a role to play. We all have a superpower. And it's a matter of finding it. And I work with so many young people who are inspirational. And my job is actually to promote their voices and to help them from behind the scenes, because they're the ones who are going to take this on. But it's not a matter of, oh, well, bad luck, guys. We've had the party, you clean up the room. It's, we're going to come and we're going to help you and we're going to find you, whatever we can to help make your lives easier in doing this. And the young generation, I've been so involved in so many ways with them, that the key elements are recognize what eco grief is. It's real. If it's that bad, do try and find some help. Find your tribe, find your community, people you can talk with, and know that there's so many other people out there who are doing, and that's where I take my comfort. And hopefully they can find a way to build that comfort, and then they can start doing things. They can sit there and say, okay, what can I do? What could we do as a group? Is there something that will make a collective pact? Let's just say next week we're going to give up using plastic bottles. Okay, so what are we going to do to prep for that? Those are the kind of things.
Community is a vital part, mainly because you won't feel so isolated when obstacles or setbacks and inevitably start to arise.
Yeah. And in fact, that's the challenge. That's part of life. Is not easy. Sorry. We all of us think, oh, I'm going to come to work. I've got a new job. Oh, it's wonderful. Then suddenly you find out that you have a colleague, co-worker who's probably not that nice, or is going behind your back, or taking your stuff, or you have a boss who's doing that. It's not easy. So the sooner that we start to realize these are the challenges, critical thinking and resilience and creativity, that's how we get around those. It's not, I'm sorry, I have never, ever used sine, cosine, or trigonometry since I left school. I should have learned that other things instead.
Yeah, it's funny because that's my world. So I feel like in the world of, I know all the ways that plays a role in the world and how useful that is in all these cool ways. But I know so little about plastics. And so I'm like, I wish I knew more about plastics, but I can tell you a lot about co-sided side and how cool they are. But but I think, tying this up, closing this conversation off with this topic of education, I think something you said early in this conversation was really profound, which was a lot of what seems to be the reason people are so disconnected from the worlds around them is because they haven't been in environments to properly connect with the entire process of nature, and with people who have come before them and who will come after them. What are some of the things that you've seen done in different communities, particularly in schools, that help students connect with their world? You talked a little bit about having a little plot of a garden, but like, what are some other ways?
Um, I think the easiest one for me, and it was interesting. I think long and hard about this. I'm I think young people are so full of enthusiasm and they want to get out and do something. So anything that gives them an action. So the plot, the garden or whatever is one thing. Another are doing cleanups. Another is actually not just going to a movie, but actually understanding how that movie was made and what are the ramifications. I mean, it's now this is really funny. I watch movies, Marvel, you've got, I don't know, what are they, the Avengers or whatever. And I'm sitting there, your architect friend must be going, they've just destroyed all of those buildings. What about the people who live in there? Or, you've ruined that planet or whatever. Those are the lessons we should be saying. Do we have the right to do that? Is that normalizing that kind of attitude? And maybe start thinking about, how would I do this different? If I were a superhero and I had to come in and I'm battling the aliens, is there a way I could do it where I did less destruction? They're fun questions because they're just crazy. But sometimes it's through that craziness the stories start to come, the ways, the solutions. And so, in a way, as we've been down the road, my son had terrible ADHD as a kid. So, academically, he didn't do very well. And it was terrible because he never had time to discover his creativity. He now is a photographer, but he learnt by himself to teach himself by watching YouTube videos from Khan Academy or from, other actually really interesting people who spoke to him in a way that he could connect. You've got resilience, you've got creativity. You need the humility to know that just because you go up each class every year does not a promotion make. It's not a promotion. And I know many kids, particularly I live in Switzerland, which is sort of super overachieving, where they leave school and we have this valley of death because many of these kids have been brought up in families where their parents have a job, but they've never known what it's like to be without a job or not to know where they're going or what that future can hold. Because it's unless you're a lawyer, a doctor, you don't have that path. You've got to go find something, and it may be nothing that you intended to do. So how do you keep hope? How do you keep agency? How do you keep integrity whilst trying to fill that black hole between I finished my education, I want to go earn money and make a living or do something, and what are the different pressures that are I'm going to face, and how do we support each other through that? So I always think that that's an area that we kind of go, oh, we finished your school, wash my hands of you. Next time I'll see you is when you're in a job.
Hmm. I feel like all these different worlds come together when we're dealing with any of these issues, because you can't just be like, all right, we're going to cut plastics, or it's not so simple because it ties into so many different aspects. And often I find that the roots for change often lie in education, because it is the only way in which you can kind of massively change some of these like principles and ideas and values, which then manifest all these other decisions that we take. But
Yeah.
this was a lovely conversation. I really want to say thank you for joining and spending the last hour with us. I think there was a lot to be learned from what you're saying, and it's something I want to start paying more attention to as well. I think sustainability is something that is very important to think about, and I think in my education we very, very rarely spoke about it, maybe even never. And so it is something I think is really important to incorporate into my thinking manually now, because it's not something I think about often.
You
So
almost
thank
have
you.
to remind yourself it's kind of a coexistence. We coexist with the planet, with everything on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not
Well,
infinite.
no, it's not infinite, but it's evolving all the time. And I think also accepting that evolution, our own personal journey, vis-a-vis the planet's journey, vis-a-vis everything, that's part of it. I don't know, have you ever seen, there's an animation of the sun traveling through the universe with the solar system going round it in this most
Yes.
beautiful dance.
Yeah.
That is the beauty that we're missing. If we just sort of accept that this is part of our interconnectedness, I think it's wonderful.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having put up with me, bleating on about my plastics.
No, I loved it. I think you built the world in which that you navigate and look at. I feel like you presented your lens really well, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.